with no end in sight to restrictions to curb the spread of COVID-19, there are renewed calls for government to implement a basic income grant. But the question is, how will it be able to fund this? Duma, Gqubule, who is the founding director at the Center for Economic Development and Transformation, has some few suggestions, and he joins us now to take us through these. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Gqubule. Thank you very much for your time today. First of all, let's talk about the cost of exactly how much government needs to raise in order to be able to give the basic income grant to South Africans in need.
So let me just say there has been a proliferation of research reports on how to fund this basic income grant. So the government can't say it doesn't know how to implement the basic income grant. So I'll just summarize the findings of many of these reports. So South Africa's got three poverty levels. There is the food poverty level at 585 rands a month. There is the lower bound poverty level at 840. And then there's the upper bound poverty level at 1,268. So the cost at the food poverty line would be, the gross cost would be 192 billion rands. Now, we mustn't look at the gross cost of this grant. Remember, when government spends money into the economy, it gets money back. There are VAT collections, and some people will pay back. You and I who are employed will pay back into the fiscus in terms of a clawback. And on top of that, the grant would stimulate local economies and generate local multipliers. So with those multipliers, a multiplier measures the additional GDP growth of the economy above what the initial spend is. So for example, if you spend a rand, it's 1.5 for the economy, for example. So what we would see, I calculate that in the short-term cost to the fiscus would be about 50% of the gross cost. So we're talking about 92 billion rands at the level of the food poverty line. Now, it sounds like a lot of money, but it is not a lot of money within the context of our budget. It could be argued as well, because this is equivalent to 2% of GDP boost to the economy, and our economy is in a desperate situation. The government announced austerity policies of 265 billion that will be withdrawn from the economy over the next 3 years. The government then reduced the social relief of distress grant in April, and then we had these power blackouts that reduced the growth of the economy, and then the lockdown, and then the violence of the last 2 weeks. So our economy is in a desperate situation. I would argue that this thing should not be financed. It should be money that goes into the economy. But many of these proposals have proposals on how to tax the rich. A wealth tax would raise about 200 billion rands. Other social security tax, according to one think tank called the IEJ, said it would raise 65 billion rands. So there's no shortage of proposals on the table as to how to finance it. I have a different view on how it should be financed. I think we should just spend the money into the economy, and I think it would be an investment in the nation's prosperity and our stability.
How do you reconcile the statement that you made and your suggestion that money spent also equals money generated? So when you spend money, you're also generating money for the economy. How does that then align with the austerity policies?
Yes, now I think the difficulty for the government is that they've committed to these austerity policies to the rating agency and so forth. So for the president, if he announces this basic income grant, it basically means the end of the austerity policies. He might have to let go of the finance minister, I don't know. But South Africa is in a desperate situation. We cannot continue to inflict self-harm on our people through these irrational austerity policies. You must remember that a government doesn't operate like a household. A national budget does not operate like a household budget. When the government withdraws money from the economy, there's a negative multiplier. It reduces the growth of the economy. It results in more unemployment, poverty, and hunger in the economy. Yeah.
So how would government work to ensure job creation and still be able to afford the basic income grant that is being advocated for?
Okay, I'm arguing that we should. There's two there's two things. We should have a basic income grant to provide an immediate humanitarian response to the crisis. Now, let me just explain. When there's an earthquake, you have to have an immediate humanitarian response. And more than 100 countries around the world provided unconditional cash transfers to affected people from this crisis. And then once you provided the immediate you must remember that 10 million people in May went hungry, including 3 million children. So once you've provided the humanitarian response to the crisis, the next step is it provides a dignity floor for millions of South Africans. Then the next step is have a second dignity floor, a job guarantee that the government can. I've been looking at, so we can have a basic income and a job creation program at the same time. I've been looking at the expanded public works program. The government currently spends about 3 billion rands a year, and it creates about 500,000 jobs every year. That's a drop in the ocean when we've got 11.4 million unemployed people. The budget for the expanded public works program should be increased 10 or 20 times to be able to provide more jobs to people who are in need of the jobs. It should be set at the level of the minimum, the living wage. You must remember that our minimum wage was set at a level that is far below what most South Africans would agree is a living wage. So we could set another dignity floor at the level of the minimum of the living wage for South Africans. Yeah.
You also talk about the basic income grant somehow stimulating the economy. In what ways would it be able to do this?
Okay, so most economists agree that when we go, let's say you get the basic income grant and then at 585, and then you go and spend it at Mama Gqubule's spaza shop. She goes and spends it on wherever she wants to spend it on. So there's a multiplier effect in terms of the basic. So economists have calculated these, there's different estimates of the multipliers, but the initial spend, the return to the economy is far greater than the initial spend. So that those are the local economic multipliers. And research has shown in countries like Namibia that informal sector workers use a portion of their basic income to invest in their informal enterprises, and that increases production and output. So there are many local economic multipliers in communities through such spending. Imagine if money goes into the community of Soweto, and there'll be suddenly more money around, and many people will be employed to, yes, there's so many benefits. People mustn't see this as a cost. They must see it as an investment in the stability and prosperity of our nation.
It really is all about not only perspective, but the economics of it as well, Mr. Gqubule. Thank you very much for your time today. That's Mr. Duma Gqubule. He's the founding director at the Center for Economic Development and Transformation. We'll be back in just a moment with a recap of your days, the leading stories, and also taking those stories forward this afternoon.